Welcome to the Embodied Self Podcast, a place for you to discover, explore, and embrace your truest expression. I'm your host, Ashley Pearl, and I believe wholeheartedly that the path to your most meaningful, joyful, and vibrant life is through becoming who you truly are. Join me as I share personal stories and have soul-expanding conversations alongside incredible humans just like you, with the intention to inspire your journey of personal exploration. We'll cover topics of self-development, wellness, spirituality, and so much more. And better yet, we'll share tangible tools and practices to support your most aligned life. So together, let's dive in and see what magic awaits on the other side of your most embodied self. Hello everyone. I hope you are doing so well today. I am just getting into the flow of my week, and it's always nice to start the week off having had a really nourishing weekend. And I was able to get out in nature, went on a winter hike. If you saw my Instagram stories, you would have seen that it was very, very snowy, but sunny nonetheless, and really, really enjoyable. I have been nursing a tailbone injury for a few weeks now, and I'm so grateful for it because it allowed me to birth this podcast finally into existence, have the spaciousness for that, and slow down a little bit. And when I was finally able to go on this hike and be able to do it without, too much pain, I really just realized how grateful I am for the nature that is so close to me now where I live. And you could just feel it in my body, in my cells and my bones, the way I feel after I come back from something like that. And, you don't have to go on a snowy 3-mile hike in order to feel that way. You can literally go to a park and just, sit by a tree, or you can, touch and ruffle some leaves, just go on a walk. But something as simple as that can really have a profound effect on us. So just something I wanted to share. And, I hope that while you're listening to this, you're doing something that brings you joy and that brings you connectedness to your own being. Maybe that's going on a walk. Maybe you're listening to this while you're drawing or painting. Maybe you're driving and looking out into some beautiful scenery. Or maybe you're doing dishes and finding presence in that task at hand. Wherever you're tuning in from, I just want to say how grateful I am to have you here, and so grateful for your support. I was so blown away last week, so blown away by the outpouring love and support for this show, and for your feedback and your reviews. It really means the world to me. And if you know me, or if you're just getting to know me, I've always been just such a big advocate for feedback and for sharing, your thoughts with someone. And I really appreciate feedback and getting an opportunity to learn and to grow. I mean, we're building this show together, you guys. This isn't just me pouring to you. This is a two-way street. If there are topics that you want to hear explored, if you want to, have me share something specific or bring a guest on to jam on a certain topic, like this is our show, and we are building this together. I don't know where this show is going to go, right? Like, I have no idea in general where this podcast is going to head, the direction. I have some idea, but that was one of the reasons why I was able to finally launch it. I was like, I don't have to have all the answers. We're going to build this together. And something, to know about me is words of affirmation are my love language. if you know the Five Love Language book and theory, system, I don't know what to call it. But because of that, being able to, read your words in all of the messages that were sent to me of what you think about the show or what you would like to see more on the show or how it has moved you in some way, this all truly makes me feel just so seen and so warm and fuzzy inside. And I am just so thankful for this opportunity to share my heart and to bring the hearts of others to you. And with that being said, I am so extremely excited to share today's guest with you because he has an amazing heart. And I've known for a really long time that I've wanted to interview this person. He is a dear friend, still a new friend in terms of time. We've only known each other for a couple of years. But someone who has made such an impact on my life already through his beingness and through the people I've met through him, the communities I've been a part of, because he is such a connector of people. I think at least 5 times a day he is like connecting people to other people and building these really great, friendships and connections. It's really remarkable. And I've always wanted to have him on my podcast because to me, his story is one of courage and trust and perseverance and so much more. And his story deserves to be shared. Everyone's story deserves to be shared. And again, I'm just so grateful to kind of hold this space and this medium through which that can happen. The funny thing about this guest, me and this guest met 2 years ago. We both used to work for the same company. We both worked in digital marketing and advertising, and we were on a work trip, and it was in Las Vegas, and I was hanging out with some people, and I just look over and see an Irish-looking dude talking about crystals and meditation, and I'm pretty sure I walked up to him and just said, "You and I should talk." or like we should be friends. And that's exactly what happened. Cut to him and I on the first floor of Caesar's Palace. I think it's 2 a.m. at this point, just sharing our dreams and our hopes and what we want to create in the world. He was talking about how he had this business idea and he was like ready to do it, but he was at this job and it took up a lot of his time and he was grappling with what to do about that. And I was sharing how I just really, 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 really wanted to move across the country and live in this place that I've been dreaming about living in for like 8 years at that time. And I also had this dream of, leaving corporate America and starting my own business in the realm of coaching, and I just wasn't sure how to actually make that happen. And so he was like, "You got to quit this job and go move to Colorado and start your business." And I said, "Well, you got to quit this job and start your business." And sure enough, here we are 2 years later. I moved, I quit my job, I started the business. He quit his job and started his company, and there's been so much more magic that has happened since then as well, which we'll talk about on the show. But it just shows like meeting one person can truly help support changes in the trajectory of your life. Truly, 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 truly. Our conversation that we have is just so beautiful. We cover some really deep topics, and Patrick shares so openly about things like, growing up in an environment that wasn't conducive to really feeling feelings or having his needs met. He talks about quitting his job and starting his company, which is called Inlet, and he'll share about it in the episode. And starting that company 2 weeks before the pandemic hit. What? And probably my favorite part of the episode is towards the end, and I don't want to share too much, but we talk about depression, and he shares his experience. And I just think it is so, so, so important to speak openly about this stuff that has for so long and for so many people become something to be hidden or ashamed about. If you've been watching the news, you might have seen that Chesley Christ recently committed suicide. And what's been shared is that she was dealing with high-functioning depression, which she hid from everyone. And I don't know the exact story, right? So I won't really get into it, but I just do want to share that if something like that can happen, right? If someone who from the outside seems to just have it all, right? Like so much meaning and purpose through what she's doing in the world. If something like that can happen, then of course we have to assume that there are so many people walking this earth that are also dealing with similar things and are also hiding it from everyone. And so my hope is that in having a conversation like this and being able to talk about this more openly, perhaps we can encourage anyone who is listening to this, who is struggling, to reach out to someone for support, whether that's just letting one friend know, what you are dealing with, or a parent, or even calling, a lot of the free resources that are out there, which I'll link in the show notes. There's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, but then there's also some other resources that you can tap into. There's also, companies like BetterHelp that help kind of get you quick access to a lot of therapists and people that can help support you. So again, I'll share all this in the show notes, but I just feel so strongly that anything that is so stigmatized and that has this like energy of shame around it is only going to be released if we talk about this stuff more openly. And that is exactly what we do in this show. So we'll go straight into the episode now. And I didn't really intro, Patrick as we started. We just kind of recorded and then just started talking. And I did ask him what were some, pivotal moments that come to mind on your journey of self-discovery and becoming who you truly are, and what really allows you to feel like your most authentic self. And he just starts kind of talking about that. And so that's where this episode begins. And I'm so excited for you all to hear it. So without further ado, here is the conversation that I have with Patrick, and I really hope that you enjoy.
I mean, one, I think just embodiment is like, that's definitely alive for me, just like not just today, but I think just overall in my life right now, because I'm really trying to shift from this energy of doing to being. And whether it be embodiment practices or even just like consciously being aware of embodiment and and just like really feeling connected to myself, my energy, my body, like just that infinite resourcefulness, that we can all tap into. Because I realized the other day, and this isn't a new thing, but it's like, I'm so up here so often, or like there'll be one part of my body that's lighting up, and I'm just, I'll be focusing on that, and I'm like, what's wrong here? Like, what do I need to do? But then it's like, because I'm concentrating on it, I am trying to answer my question from that same place of discomfort, when that's not the way to go about it, right? It's like, let me tap into the other resources, that I have, whether it be within my body or externally or whatever. And, let's see what they're saying, and what they can use to kind of swoop in and and address the discomfort, that I might be feeling, or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's like, what's that quote from is it Albert Einstein? I feel like it's not, but it might be, who says you can't like heal from the same, I don't think he says heal. You can't heal from the same, or you can't solve a problem from like the same mindset from which it started, or something like that. And
It's something like that. I know the quote you're talking about. I can't quote
it. Yeah,
it.
but I think that it I feel like that speaks to what you're talking about as well, where it's like you can't, if you're stuck in a part and you're viewing the situation from that part, whether it's like a victim-y part or like a part that's just really feeling like, right, angry and like mad at the world or whatever it is, it's hard to kind of see with maybe clear eyes. And I think what you're saying, and tell me if I'm wrong, is like there are other resources that you have to pull from that help you in those moments when you're needing to move through something.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, resources, perspectives, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's why we go to therapy, right? That's why we have trusted friends. That's why we have coaches, because we've grown up with this one singular lens that's all we know, and until somebody comes along and says, hey, there's another way to look at things, or turn around, there's a whole different viewpoint, right? There's a completely different angle from which you can view this. Then we're going to stay stuck in that tunnel vision of our own minds, our own hearts, our own woundedness. And that's perfectly fine. I mean, there's 7 billion humans on the planet that do this every day because that's all we know. We don't know any different. And that's the beauty of it. I mean, that's the beauty of this infinite resourcefulness that we can all tap into, if we're aware of it, and two, if we choose to do it.
Oh, yeah, this is so good. So let me ask you this, because I actually wondered this about you, and this is a perfect place to ask it. Because now I know you as this person who is super connected, who has all these resources, and you seem to just know how to guide yourself through whatever it is that comes your way, right? Which is what a lot of people strive for. Have you always been this way? Like, have you always been super tapped in, or is that something that you learned or figured out over time?
Oh, definitely something that I learned and figured out over time. But also I love, thank you for seeing me in that way. And I'm laughing because I had a conversation with my therapist the other day about this exact thing, where it's both a blessing and a curse, right? And like the self-awareness that I have cultivated is beautiful. Like, it's amazing. And I'm so grateful for it. And it can also be my biggest downfall, because I'll feel like one little twinge of something in my body and be like, well, what's that? Is there trauma stored there? Yep, let's go in and see if we can fix this. And it's just like, no, like that was just an itch. You just scratch it and move on. Like, this doesn't need to, you don't need to like bring out the mental health and emotional toolbox to do this thing. But anyway, getting back to your question, absolutely something that I've cultivated over time, because growing up with an alcoholic parent, my dad was an alcoholic, and, in a very codependent household that didn't talk about emotions, like, we just swept everything under the rug, and add on like a nice, really thick, hefty layer of like just really traditional Catholicism and shame and guilt, all of that. It was just, you bury your emotions. Everything's fine. I'm fine. Let's focus on you. And I'm going to do everything I can to help you, because that's effectively where I got my self-worth from. And, and I still get into that loop today, where I'm looking outside of myself for validation, for my self-worth, for things that make me feel grounded and worthy and accepted. And it wasn't until, let's say, my early 30s where I really dove into, let's say, the meat and the heart of, my health and healing journey. Found an unbelievable therapist. Mind you, I've been going to therapy for 10 years already, off and on, but like 4 years straight, prior to moving to Colorado and finding this, my current therapist. And everything just changed, and it was, hey, you have permission to go within yourself
Mm.
for answers. Not only that, like, I mean, let's take this 6 steps back. It was like, you have permission to be sad. You have permission to be angry. You have permission to feel everything that you're feeling, and it's all okay. And yeah, it's one gigantic fucking mess. And that's okay, because you don't solve 31 years of trauma and repressed emotions and all sorts of other stuff in an instant. It's gonna be messy. And that's the interesting thing about, I think, the health and healing process is we all build these systems that keep us safe, keep us stable, that keep the status quo. And I don't mean our own status quo necessarily. I mean, that's part of it, but it could be the family status quo. You know, don't rock the boat, don't upset mom, don't upset dad, you know, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this applies to so many different instances. And eventually those systems just don't work anymore, and they don't serve you anymore, and they have to come crumbling down. And that can be a really painful process, and it can be a really unsettling process, because this seemingly stable ground that you have created over a lifetime is suddenly crumbling, and you're left standing there, you know, in this uncertainty, in this void that was once seemingly stable. And you're just left saying, you know, like, what the hell? Like, and there's this graspy feeling that I certainly experience, where, you know, you're just like, oh my gosh, and you just feel like you're falling. But it is, in retrospect, once it's done, not during it, in retrospect, it's just the most beautiful free fall that I think anybody can ever be in. And like I said, it's really scary what is happening. But it's so necessary. It's so necessary. And I just remember waking up, it was a Saturday morning, and I was just in this, like, I was feeling the thousands of pounds of anxiety, and I just didn't want to get out of bed. But all I'm thinking about is my to-do list, which was, you know, 15 things long. Mind you, realistically, I could have only gotten 4 of them done on that day. But, you know, typical my type A conditioning and, you know, whatever. I was like, no. And I was shaming myself for just, like, not wanting to get out of bed and whatever. And then finally, I just started to let myself cry, and I just lost it. And I don't know, it might have been an hour, it might have been 15 minutes, you know, it certainly felt like an hour, but I just let myself fall apart. And I remember, like, screaming into a pillow and, like, punching the bed, and just, you know, I was letting out a lot of anger. And there was this little voice that just said, let it crumble. Let it crumble. Let it crumble. And I did. And I was exhausted afterwards, you know, because that letting out that much emotion and that much anger is taxing. But I felt so much better, so much lighter. And it was the best possible thing I could have done, you know. And you mentioned kind of like these pivotal moments, you know, in your life. And I look at that morning, that Saturday morning, you know, just in bed, just raging and crying and letting the emotions flow. That was definitely one of them.
Oh, Patrick, thank you so much for sharing all of that, and for your, as always, just raw as hell vulnerability and honesty. And there's just so much goodness from everything you just shared that I want to go in like 1,000 paths. But I just want to go back to that visual of 2 visuals. One, when you were talking about the crumbling, the whole time you were speaking, I was visualizing this house that was, like, built, and then just knocking it all down, and you're left with just, like, the very, you know, base of the foundation, and rebuilding it on your own, right? Like, you had, like, your family, you had your everything growing up, probably the church, and, you know, whatever, helping you build a foundation. Then you rip that down, And now here you are, of course, with support of, like you said, your therapist, and I'm sure, you know, friends along the way, people along the way. But it's, yeah, it takes time and it takes energy to rebuild that. And like you said, it can be really scary to look around and be like, whoa, I don't have a house here. Like, I don't know how to, it's almost like I don't know how to react to the rest of the world if I don't have these like bases to look at, right? And there's such beauty in letting things fall apart that aren't serving you, that aren't working for you,
Yeah.
just like you said, so that you can build back up again. And I love that that pivotal moment for you is allowing yourself to cry for so many reasons. For anyone listening to the show, I think so many people can identify with growing up in a place where your emotions weren't either validated, maybe people were told they were too sensitive, or maybe it was just like, whoop, don't want to rock the boat here. You know, our attention has to go towards this person or that person, mom or dad, whoever. And there's that phrase, right? You have to feel to heal, and you hear it everywhere and it rhymes and it's great, but it's like, this is what we're talking about.
Yep.
You
100%.
have all those years pent up in your body where you wanted to cry but didn't, where you were scared, right? Like, I don't know how, I mean, I don't want to put stories in, but right, where you didn't fulfill whatever emotional loops needed to happen, like that gets stored. So maybe that itch you had, like maybe that was stored trauma, who the hell knows, right?
Yeah.
But there's it's so important to let that stuff out, and we're just not taught that. We're not taught that growing up. And I want to create a world where people know how to do that from the beginning, right? Where feelings are honored,
Absolutely.
where that's just standard. And that's just, I think we're getting there, but it's definitely not where we're at today, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, and we've definitely taken great strides. I think you hit on such an interesting point of, you know, I mean, it's just this whole idea of the body keeps the score, right? And we are certainly, you know, as a society, but, you know, in Western medicine, you know, coming around to this idea, and there's research starting to back this up, of our emotions get stored somewhere in the body. And the cause of so much disease, or so many diseases, isn't necessarily, I mean, you know, yes, there's pesticides in our food and all sorts of this stuff. I mean, that could be a whole nother thing we could talk about. But, you know, in addition to that, there's just this discomfort and these stuck emotions that get stored in our body that cause physical blockages. And they don't allow both, you know, the energy as well as, you know, the nutrients and these physical things that need to move through our body, you know, doesn't allow them to move through. And then that's where, you know, cells get separated. You know, that's what happened. You know, that's how cancer gets caused, right? I mean, you know, you get these cells that get isolated from the others. They don't talk to the rest of the body and the rest of the system. But they, you know, they are programmed to stay alive. And so they're going to shift, they're going to mutate. I'm sure I'm butchering some of this, but, you know, just the overall, the overarching part of this is true. You know, and they mutate, and then they start to multiply, but they start to multiply as cancer. And then they start to eat, you know, the other cells. And, you know, that's a real, you know, micro example of what can happen with the individual. But I mean, hell, look at what we've been through in the last 2 years with this pandemic. I mean, go back to April of 2020, we were all isolated, you know, in our homes, separated from each other. I mean, there's no greater disease causing, you know, mechanism other than possibly, I think, our modern day food system that, you know, that exists, you know, that we've all been through, and we all collectively went through that. And, you know, kind of tying this back to, you know, I talked about kind of this like free fall of the healing process. I'm not trying to make it sound terrifying or intentionally scary. I'm really just saying this to, you know, anybody listening, that like, if you're in that, you're not alone. And when you enter into this growth process, this health process, this healing process, it's so vitally important that you surround yourself with people, who can support you, who are going to be there for you. And that's not always the same people that were there for you before, because not everybody's necessarily going to understand, this process that you enter into, because you will transform. If you stay that road, you will transform it. It'll be the most beautiful thing that you've ever been through in your life, because you're going to come back to yourself. You're going to come home to yourself. And that's what the world needs. The world needs people who have come home to themselves, who are living in their truth, who are living in alignment, and who are sharing their wisdom. There's, we all hear it's like that adage of like, follow your passion and, whatever. And it's like, that gets kind of, put down a lot, because you think of just like that starving artist archetype who's like, well, like, I want to make my art, but like no one's buying it. It's like, okay, yeah, like sure. But like, there is a nugget of truth in that. And it's like, it's not necessarily follow your passion. It's just follow your truth, and that's not necessarily to say that it's going to be all roses and butterflies and, yellow brick roads, the whole way. There's going to be some tests, there's going to be some hardship, along the way generally. But, as you and I both know, because you and I both are in Lacey Phillips TBM program, these tests and these hardships aren't necessarily saying, hey, you should stop. They're not necessarily trying to block you. They're actually there to serve you, in the sense of, oh, if suddenly this mountain gets put in front of you that you're supposed to climb, it's really just the universe saying, well, how badly do you want this? Are you going to stay in the same behavior that, the same, you could insert codependency, you can insert low self-worth, you can insert, any number of things into, that equation. And, it's essentially the universe is just saying, like, are you going to stay in that low self-worth, or are you going to rise to the level? Are you going to rise to the energetic frequency where you belong, by the way? You're going to make the choice to do that.
Yeah.
You're going to make the choice to do that. And not everybody chooses to do that. And it's also hard. It's hard, because this whole leveling up process, it seems on the outside like it's this really amazing, great thing. But as you and I both know, anytime you say yes to yourself, anytime you say yes to something new, your body kind of freaks out, and your ego certainly does, because it's new. Because our brains aren't wired for new. Our brains are wired for routine. Because that's a biological mechanism, right? Our brains are wired to take the same route to work every day. It's like we've all had that moment where we've been driving, and a few minutes goes by, and then all of a sudden you're like, I don't remember the last like 3 miles of driving, because you tuned out, you started daydreaming or whatever, but you're on a road that's familiar. You're on your commute to work, or, wherever you're going to the grocery store, like, the way. Your body knows the way, your brain knows the way. It's locked in, and that's our brains using those neural pathways, those neural highways, versus like, if you're going somewhere new, then, your hands are at 10 and 2, maybe it's storming or whatever, like you are locked into paying attention. And, because anything could happen at any moment. Like, you could hydroplane, there could be, lightning, whatever. I don't mean to use like these extreme examples per se, but I think they are relatable, because we've all been through that. Yeah. But when we step into something new, you and I have both left careers to start, companies in completely different areas than where we were previously. And we've both gone through that internal turmoil where our egos and our minds are saying, no, like this was safe. Like you need to stay here. You need to stay on someone's W-2 with that steady paycheck because that's safety. You know, and our brains immediately go to the worst case scenario of just like, nope, if you do this, like you're going to end up homeless on the streets, starving. And that's, I mean, that's an actual thought that I know that I've had.
Same. Many times.
Know, yeah. And I know that it's not true. Like you have to just pause and actually ask yourself, you know, do the Byron Katie thing. Like, is this true? No, it's not true. Like I'm so incredibly far from that. But yeah, this whole leveling up process actually feels in many ways like you're being torn from yourself, because in so many ways you actually are, because you're tearing yourself from your old self and you're creating a new self. You're creating a new identity. And, you know, that can be a really uncomfortable process. It's a beautiful process, but it can be a really uncomfortable process. And it's so worth it. It's so incredibly worth it.
Yeah. So take us through like the other side of that, right? Because we've had so many amazing conversations within this one conversation, right? Like what that process of finally allowing yourself to go into the healing process, right? To feel all those feelings you suppressed and repressed for a really long time, moving into the process of, you know, working with someone to help you actually work through and move through some of those things. And now you spoke about, right, how you built the awareness around why your body freaks out so much when you're making change, and having that awareness allowed you to, and continues to allow you to, same with me, navigate those times where your brain's always going to the worst case scenario. But I want to come back to this question because I'm excited to share, because we have talked about a little bit of like, I don't want to say the darker sides of healing, but I can, because we both know that, and for anyone listening, like you have to go through the dark times, and as deep down as you go into like the depths of the darkness, that's as high up as you can go, and like the light and the love and all those things. And I would love to know, like, what has life looked like for you on the other side of the courageous acts of, right, quitting your really comfortable corporate job and starting your own company, and even moving to different, right, like you've moved around a few times, like what gets to happen for you on the other side of some of those, like, you know, darker, more emotional experiences.
Yeah, thank you for this, because I was becoming aware. I'm like, wow, I'm making this process seem so terrible. But I tend to do that just because like shadow work is one of my specialties and I'm so comfortable in it. And you know, it's also beautiful. And, you know, to answer your question, the thing for me is just freedom. I mean, it's true freedom, and it's freedom and it's agency over myself, my emotions, my life, you know, my choices. And because it is mine. And, you know, really the biggest word I can use to sum it up is just sovereignty of all of those things. Because I mean, I was journaling last night as I was going to bed, and I realized, I was like, man, it's been 2 years since I left my career that I'd been in for close to 15 years, and struck out on my own and launched this company and pivoted the company. And, you know, now I'm starting a whole nother new thing. And I was just like, yeah, let's reflect on that. Because, you know, I had, you know, those just, you know, that blinding fear, you know, 2 years ago of just like, are you really going to do this? Like, is this, you know, okay. And I was having all those fears. And I wrote last night, I was like, and you've been supported at every step along the way. Because when you start to say yes to yourself, when you start to heal and expand and go inward and find your truth and start to live from that place, magic happens. And I don't use that word lightly. It's actual magic, because you are putting out this frequency. You've really discovered your own frequency, your own truth, your own path. And you're all of the sudden saying to the world, hey, here I am, and whether you know it or not, support is going to find you.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you need to verbalize that. Sometimes it just kind of happens, and that's the beauty of it. Because as much as I had this vision for, Inlet and what I wanted to do, it took a whole completely, it took a whole left turn. Right. And, in the startup world, you're sort of expecting that, at least to some extent. But there was a 3-week period in October of 2020 that was really dark for me, because I knew the old version wasn't working, but I didn't know what was next.
Mm-hmm. And do you want to share what Inlet is, just for anyone listening who doesn't know?
Yes, sure. Thanks. Good point. So Inlet is the startup that I founded. It is an app for communities in health, spiritual, and self-improvement to have a truly private space to communicate, to share resources, to connect with each other in a really mindful way without the noise of advertising or people tracking your data and, all of the pitfalls of, all of the major social media platforms that we are so used to. And yeah, it's truly meant to serve communities in those arenas in the highest way possible. So that's what Inlet is. But it didn't start that way, but the first version just didn't work. And so we knew we needed to pivot. And yeah, it was a really dark 3 weeks, but there was this little voice inside. And when I say little voice, I mean little voice, because I was actually having a conversation via text with a friend this morning. We were just talking about how intuition and your higher self often speaks in whispers, whereas your ego screams and kicks, and it's the loudest thing.
Right. Like, how
possible.
unfair is that? Like, we're just not set up for success in that way.
Yeah. Well, and your intuition is often so subtle that you not only will you miss it, but even if you do catch it, you're kind of like, well, this voice is so quiet. Like, should I actually listen to it? And then you dismiss it, and then, you pull the same tarot card 3 straight days in a row, and you're like, okay, universe, like, I hear you. Right. But yeah, and this just little voice just said, keep going. And, of course I was like, where, like, where am I going? Like, I don't know. And that's the thing, is like, we, especially in our culture in America, there's just this like bigger, better, faster. It's this culture of movement, right? And we don't often allow ourselves to just stop and to pause. And, I'm thinking about, if you get lost in the woods, you're supposed to just stay in that same spot, because the further you wander, the harder it is for a rescue team to find you. But if you just stay there, there's a whole system that they use. And if you just stay there, because generally, like, you're probably not far from the trail, someone will come find you, or the idea will come find you, if you just give yourself room to just pause. And I mean, I've been in this like clawing, wanting to move forward for the last like 4 or 5 months, when in reality, what I've needed to do is just pause. And I haven't necessarily allowed myself that. And it's actually created this state of depression, that I'm in, that I didn't really discover until a few weeks ago, when my therapist just straight up told me, she was like, Patrick, you're depressed. And I just started laughing.
She said something else. She didn't call you Patrick.
Yeah, right? You're right. Yeah. She looks at me, she said, babe, you're depressed.
I had to bring it up. Sorry.
No, that's fair. Yeah. Well, she and I have been working together for 6 years. So we have, I think it just sounds weird to a lot of people to be called babe by their therapist, but for mine, it's totally fine.
Yeah. And I think what people are going to find even weirder, and I don't say this because it's weird, but I say it because it's so freaking stigmatized, is you and I just kind of laughed and made light of a of depression. And I do want to be, sensitive and just make a note here that if someone's listening and they are experiencing depression and are like feeling very alone or scared, one, to definitely reach out for support. But two, I don't want to make it seem like we're making light of the situation. You and I think, are both in a place where we can, again, like, I think once you separate yourself from the thing, it becomes a lot more easier over time to speak about it. There were years where like I wouldn't dare mention the word depression, right? Like, oh, that was
Oh, for
talked
sure.
about.
Absolutely.
But when you get to a place where you can, that like the depression isn't you, right? The emotions you experience aren't you. They're all separate from you, and you get to kind of view it from this place. I think it becomes much more easier to talk about. So I just wanted to take a pause there and make mention of that. But thank you for being vulnerable to share that, right, with people, because I think just in hearing someone else speak about something like this, it's like you feel just so much less alone. And
Yeah.
you referenced earlier, I don't want to hijack what you were saying because I'm just going on thought here, but
yeah.
You mentioned it way back earlier when you were talking about the pandemic, and this has just come up in so many messages that people are sending to me. So I feel like it needs to be shared. Because we are living in a pandemic, our nervous systems have been in a state of constant fear for a prolonged period of time. And if you go back to what you were sharing about the safety mechanisms and like what we do to feel safe, like,
yeah.
Of course your body's freaking out right now, right? Of course you're reaching for the extra Ben and Jerry's every single day. Of course you might be gaining weight. Of course you might feel fatigued. Of course you might feel, stressed and on high alert or hypervigilant. Any existing conditions within you, or maybe they're even new strategies. Maybe you're developing OCD tendencies. Like I've heard that happening to multiple people. There's nothing wrong with you. Your body is just trying any which way it can to find a sense of like certainty and safety in this crazy time we're living in. So depression is part of that too, right? Like at some point your body's just going to be like, you know what? I don't have anything left in me anymore. Like I'm tapped out.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, going back to 2 points ago, you're correct. Like I'm not laughing at depression. I'm laughing at my own, because I'm in a place where I can do that now. And it was actually, for me, truly, I really mean this, it was a joyful moment when she named it, because I hadn't allowed myself to go there. I hadn't allowed myself, because, and, this is going back to, what we originally started talking about, where you were like, you're really good at like, you didn't say this, but like fixing yourself. Right. But that's the thing that I've been in. I was like, oh, I've been in this loop of like, oh, I'm off and I'm feeling this way. And like, what am I doing wrong? Et cetera, et cetera. I've been in the shadow side of that for the last few months, which, in reality, it's like, no, there wasn't anything to fix. It was just, you needed to pause, because I realized, because as soon as my therapist named it, I felt so much better. And I was like, oh my God, you're right. And I looked at her and I was like, I've literally got every symptom. I'm like, this is just textbook depression. Like I've gained 25 pounds. Like I'm fatigued. I'm not feeling inspired. I'm feeling really isolated. I'm not as social, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, again, just checklist. And afterwards, of course I went home and I was like, okay, like, let me just sit with this. Where did this disconnect come from? How far away from myself am I? And I don't want to say what needs to happen, because that does get, into the realm of like fixing again, but what do I need to allow myself right now such that I can open up enough to get back into alignment? And going back to talking about the pandemic, it's immediately the answers came. And it was like, one, you weren't really allowing yourself vacations even before the pandemic, for at least for the 2 years prior, because you had entered into this new job and, there was a lot of pressure on you to hit your numbers and all this stuff. So you were just working. And then on top of that, you then left that career to start this company right at the beginning of the pandemic. I mean, I left to start it 2 months before the pandemic hit, and then it hit, and I just kept going. which I would absolutely make the same decision again. But I didn't allow myself breaks, even when it was just abundantly clear that not only I needed to, but I could have. I mean, December of 2020, I legit could have taken 3 weeks off because we were just at this point where things were just running smoothly, and we were pivoting the company, and like I was in a good spot, but I still didn't let myself do it because this story of like, nope, like you can't let go, like you've got to be, doing X, Y, Z. And I was like, no, man, you need a break. And I mean, the larger overarching theme here though is that not only did I didn't pause to appreciate how far I'd come, I didn't pause to give myself credit for everything that I've done. I mean, building a company and launching a startup is hard enough. Doing it in the middle of a global pandemic is, X% harder. And I just, I didn't pause to do that. And I was even talking to my coach about this, a couple of weeks ago. And he said, he goes, all right. He was like, what is your threshold? Like, what's your definition of hard? And I looked at him and I was like, well, if I can do it, then it's not hard. If I fail at it, then it's hard. We both just laughed. I mean, I was laughing at myself as the answer came, because I was like, that's so effing ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, so just like the power of the pause.
Yes.
There's so much power in pausing, and I can't drive that point home enough.
And I always say that there's productivity in the pause, because people think pausing means you're stopping movement, but you're not. In fact, I'd argue that interim pauses are necessary for forward movement, or else, sure, you'll get to a certain point, but then you're going to have to stop because of burnout for a really long time. So for anybody listening, in addition to all the wonderful messages that Patrick has shared, one, allow yourself to take a rest and a pause, and really look at all that you've done and accomplished. Like, even if that's just like showing up every day and like brushing your teeth, great, celebrate that. Like, celebrate the hell out of that, because we are a society that's moving so quickly through life and trying to get to this standard or reach a certain, right? Whatever it is, that's not your truth. And so I don't know if there's any message you want to leave for everybody before we close out here, but that feels like a really good place to leave people.
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback on what you're saying, integration is so important. And I am guilty as charged for wanting to skip it so many times. But that's where the real magic happens. And I mean, for anybody that like goes to the gym, or like I used to do triathlon, right? Like, the gains don't happen in the gym. They actually happen in the in-between periods when you are resting.
Yeah.
That's when it happens. And it's the same. I mean, I am, again, guilty as charged. Like, you can get burnt out on health, healing, wellness, all of this stuff, if you don't take time to pause and integrate. Everything has a shadow side. Everything. And, one of the most powerful tools that we can use to not slip into the shadow side is just pausing and taking rest, and caring for ourselves in those ways. And so, I apologize if I keep going to these dark places.
No, we don't allow for
energy...
apologies on the show. Or
I know. I'm just, I'm admittedly having some moments of self-consciousness where I'm just like, oh my gosh, like, does this sound, a huge downer? However, there's gonna be plenty of people listening that are in these places that are just like, oh my gosh, that's me,
Yeah.
And that's
there's space for all of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think the last thing is just like, speak your truth, because this is my truth right now for where I'm at. I mean, I am like, I'm in a depressed state, I'm not necessarily feeling in alignment. And this is my truth in this moment. I know it's not forever, and I also know that I'm not completely disconnected from all of the wisdom that I've learned, over the years. And it's okay to be in this place. It's okay not to feel okay.
Oh, thank you so much for just verbalizing that and owning that. And I have chills because I can't even imagine just how many people you're going to impact just hearing or seeing you show up and stating that last thing that you just did. Like that's huge. And I just thank you so much for being here and always showing up in your truth no matter what. Like I appreciate you so very much, more than you know. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
being on.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah.